I read it 5 times before I could even react. Christmas is just too much with you there. That was the whole message. No emojis, no love you, not even my name. I stared at the screen, heart beating so loud I thought I'd faint. Then I typed it. Just 3 words. Thanks for the honesty. Sent. And that's when I slid down to the kitchen floor back against the oven, holding my phone like it had burned me. I didn't cry right away. It was like my body didn't know how. But then it came hot, silent tears pouring out not from my eyes, but from somewhere far deeper. I whispered the words again, softer this time. Thanks for the honesty. And then I broke. Let me know where you're listening from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. And if this story speaks to you, share your thoughts below. Don't skip, because what happens at the end will surprise you more than the betrayal itself. He was my only child. My boy. My baby. I was 24 when I had him, and 49 when I buried his father. I did everything for him. Cooked, cleaned, drove through blizzards, worked 2 jobs when we were struggling. Every year, I saved up for Christmas, not because we had much, but because I wanted him to believe in magic. I thought I had succeeded. I really did. So when I got that text, sitting alone at my kitchen table with a half-wrapped gift still in my lap, I felt like someone had opened a trap door beneath me. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was confused. Lost. Like I'd just been told I didn't exist. I stared at the tree, still lit, still cheerful. I decorated it the week before, like I always did with the old ornaments he'd made in 2nd grade and the angel he painted in Cub Scouts. I still had his stocking. Same one he'd had since he was 5. I was going to fill it with chocolate and small tools for his hobby workshop. But now, I just sat there, staring at it like it belonged to someone else's child. The phone buzzed again. I jumped, but it wasn't him. Just an ad. I didn't call. I didn't beg. I didn't ask why. I just stood up, slowly took off the kettle that had started to shriek and sat back down at the table. I took a sip of tea that had gone cold, and I breathed. The worst part, it wasn't just the words. It was what they meant. That my presence, my very being, was too much, too loud, too much emotion, too many memories, too many questions. I imagined his wife standing beside him, probably watching as he typed it. Maybe even suggesting the phrase herself. Just say it's too much with her there. It wasn't the first time I felt excluded, the first time I'd been left out of things. But it was the first time they said it out loud. And once words like that are spoken, you can't put them back in your mouth. You can't unring the bell. That night, I sat in the dark. Tree glowing in the corner. Fire off. Lights off. And I whispered his name like a prayer. Like a spell I hoped would bring back the boy who once sat in that very living room, shaking presents and giggling. The boy who used to call me Mama and draw hearts around my name. I thought of the last Christmas we all spent together. Just 2 years ago. I made a ham, pecan pie from scratch. His wife sat scrolling through her phone most of the time. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I had asked him what was wrong, but he just shrugged. Nothing, Mom. You're overthinking again. Was I, or had he already decided back then that I was too much? I didn't sleep that night. Just lay in bed, wide-eyed, staring at the ceiling fan, going in slow circles. I kept hearing his voice as a child calling from the hall. Can I come in your bed? Mama, I had a bad dream, and I'd always say yes. Every single time. The next morning, I got up early, made coffee, stared out the window at the frost on the lawn. I didn't text him again. Didn't tell him it hurt. Didn't remind him of everything I'd done. No. I just picked up a notepad, sat down at the kitchen table, and started writing. Not a letter. Not a message. A list. I titled it, Things I Won't Forget. Item 1. Christmas is just too much with you there. Item 2. The way he didn't follow up. Item 3. The ache in my chest that wouldn't leave. I didn't know what I was going to do with the list yet, but something in me, something I hadn't felt in years, was stirring. A sharpness. A clarity. A quiet voice that said, "You're not crazy, you're not broken, and you're not done." Not by a long shot. He was born on a Wednesday. Rainy gray, one of those days where the sky feels heavy even at noon. I remember gripping the bed rails, sweat pouring down my neck, screaming into a pillow, because I didn't have anyone else's hand to hold. His father, Mark, had missed it out of state on a job that turned into something else, always something else. But when they laid that baby boy on my chest, none of it mattered. He had a full head of black hair and the tiniest fists I'd ever seen. His eyes weren't even open yet, but I swore he could feel me. I named him Daniel. He weighed 6 pounds, 12 ounces. He didn't cry right away. The nurse had to rub his back for a second. But when he did cry, God, he wailed, like he had something to say already, like he'd waited until the world heard him on his terms. I loved that about him, even then. When they wheeled me into recovery, I held him the whole time, wouldn't let them take him to the nursery. I didn't want a break. I'd waited 9 months for him. No way I was letting go now. I was 24, broke terrified, but I felt like a queen. A tired, stitched-up queen with cracked lips and a paper bracelet. Mark came the next morning, smelled like cigarettes and motel soap. He brought a plush bear he bought from the hospital gift shop. It still had the plastic tag. Daniel didn't even notice him. And honestly, neither did I. The first year was a blur. Sleepless nights, mashed bananas, tiny socks that always went missing. But I didn't complain. I didn't even think about what I was missing. I had him. That was enough. I worked at a grocery store by day and cleaned houses on weekends. We lived in a 1-bedroom apartment with peeling linoleum and a heater that rattled when it came on. Every night I read to him from a torn-up copy of Goodnight Moon. I used to hold the book in one hand and stroke his forehead with the other until he fell asleep. By the time he was 4, I knew every crack in his voice, every twitch in his brow. He'd tug my sleeve when he wanted something but didn't want to say it out loud. He'd lean on my hip at the checkout line and whisper, "Can we get juice?" And I'd always say yes, even when I couldn't afford it. Christmases were always homemade, paper chains instead of garland, oranges in the stockings. A tree from the church lot, always a little crooked, but we loved it. I'd make cinnamon rolls from scratch and let him ice them with way too much glaze. We never had much, but I made damn sure he never noticed. The first time I caught him watching me cry, he was 7. I didn't think he saw. I was sitting on the floor trying to make rent money stretch to groceries, bills, and gas. He came over quietly, laid his toy next to me, and hugged my side. No questions. Just that. I remember thinking he sees me. Even that young, he saw me. Mark was in and out, mostly out. When he was there, he brought chaos, arguments, empty bottles, the kind of apologies that meant nothing said with eyes on the TV instead of my face. The last time he hit me, Daniel was 10. He saw it. And that night, I packed our things and left. No goodbye, no note, just gone. We stayed in a women's shelter for 3 months. Daniel never complained once. He asked questions, sure. Why can't I go to school? Or, why do we have to share a room? But never once did he act ashamed. Never once did he cry. I remember thinking I'm raising a survivor. When I finally saved enough to rent us a small house, it felt like a palace. 2 bedrooms, a real porch, a backyard with weeds the size of sunflowers. I let Daniel paint his own room. He chose a blue that was way too bright, but I didn't care. We built that life with our own hands. As he grew older, I made more space for his world. I'd drive him to soccer practice even after 10-hour shifts. Showed up at every game, even the cold ones. I was loud too. Embarrassingly so, he'd say. But he never asked me to stop. Teenage years were rough, sure. He slammed doors, rolled eyes, forgot Mother's Day once. But he always came around, always hugged me goodnight, always sat with me during movies, even if it meant pretending to like my taste in cheesy rom-coms. When he went to college, I cried for a week. I sent care packages every month, mac and cheese laundry quarters, handwritten notes with dumb little jokes. He called me almost every Sunday. Sometimes just to vent, sometimes just to say hi. I remember when he met Emma. She was sweet at first, polite, shy, always thanked me for dinner. But there was something distant in her tone even back then. I brushed it off as nerves. I told myself she just needs time. At their wedding, I wore navy. Emma chose the color. Said it would match the decor. I remember the way she flinched when I hugged her too long. The way Daniel pulled away slightly when I tried to fix his boutonniere. I told myself I was imagining it. Told myself not to be one of those mothers. I gave them space. Sent gifts. Made myself small. Every year I asked if they were coming for Christmas. Every year the visits grew shorter. Less enthusiastic. Until this year, when I got that text. Christmas is just too much with you there. It played in my head like a song, on repeat. Like it had been waiting in the wings for years. Like it had always been the truth, he just finally said it out loud. I sat with that pain. I let it settle in. But I also remembered everything. Every scraped knee I kissed. Every fever I stayed up through. Every Christmas morning I made magic from nothing. I wasn't going to beg for love I had already given. I wasn't going to plead for a place I built from scratch. And I sure as hell wasn't going to disappear. The first real shift happened on Daniel's 32nd birthday. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was subtle, like a wind changing direction. I had baked his favorite German chocolate cake from scratch, just like I always did. I even drove it to their house, carefully buckled into the passenger seat like a second guest. Emma answered the door. She smiled tight, shallow, like a photo smile. Her eyes didn't match her mouth. I asked if Daniel was home, and she nodded, stepping aside. I stepped into a house that used to feel familiar. This time, it felt like I was trespassing. He came down the stairs in a new polo I hadn't seen before, looked tired, like he hadn't been sleeping much. His hug was polite, gentle, short. It didn't feel like him. I handed him the cake and said, "Happy birthday, sweetheart." He smiled, nodded. "Thanks, Mom." No kiss on the cheek, no laugh, just those two words. We sat awkwardly in the living room. Emma asked if I wanted tea. I said yes, though she knew I preferred coffee. She brought it anyway, lukewarm and weak. I sipped it to be polite. Daniel made small talk. Asked about the neighbor I'd mentioned once. Talked about traffic. Work. Never once did he say, "It's good to see you." Not once. When I handed him his gift, a framed collage of old photos from his childhood, I saw it. That look, that flicker of discomfort. He smiled, but it didn't touch his eyes. He set the gift down next to the couch, didn't even unwrap it while I was there. Emma said, "It's a beautiful frame in that tone that's more dismissive than kind." I laughed it off, said I should probably head out. Daniel didn't protest. Just walked me to the door and said, "Drive safe, okay? No, come again soon. No thanks for coming." I drove home that night with the cake smell still lingering on my hands and a pit in my stomach. Something had changed. I just couldn't name it yet. Over the next few months it got worse. Calls went unanswered. messages left unread. I'd send a photo of my dog doing something silly, no reply. I'd ask if they were free for dinner. We're really swamped, maybe next month. But next month never came. Then came the Thanksgiving shift. I offered to host. I had already bought the turkey, started polishing the silverware I rarely used. But Daniel texted Emma's family invited us first this year. Maybe next time. That maybe hit like a slap. I sat in my living room with the candles already set on the table and stared at the empty chairs. The turkey went into the freezer. I ended up giving most of it to the shelter the next day. But I didn't say anything. Not to him, not to anyone. I told myself families grow. People change, schedules get full. I told myself it was normal, that I had to be understanding. Still, the ache wouldn't leave. Then came the Christmas 2 years ago, the last one we shared. I'd gone all out, bought new lights, new ornaments, even picked up a matching pajama set for the three of us. I thought it would be cute, like old times. When they walked in, Emma barely looked up from her phone. Daniel smiled, but his arms stayed crossed most of the night. We opened presents. They gave me a mug with "World's Best Grandma" printed on it. I smiled and thanked them, even though they didn't have kids yet. Emma said, "Just manifesting." Then laughed to herself like it was a private joke. Dinner was quiet. Too quiet. No compliments on the food. No seconds. They left early, said they had another stop. I stood at the door as they walked to their car and waved. Daniel looked back, once gave me a little salute, like I was a stranger. That was the first time I cried after a holiday. Not because of the silence, but because I realized how invisible I had become. Last spring, I tried inviting them for brunch. Emma responded, "That weekend doesn't really work for us. Can we take a rain check?" But no follow-up ever came. When Daniel called for Mother's Day, it was short. 5 minutes. He talked about work, about the promotion he might get, and then said, "Anyway, I'll let you go. Let me go." And just like that, he was gone again. But still, I didn't push. I didn't accuse. I didn't demand. Instead, I began to observe. I started listening to the gaps in his words, the pauses, the hesitations, and I started noticing Emma's voice in the background, even when she wasn't talking. One day, I was cleaning out the drawer where I keep old cards and letters. I found one from Daniel from years ago. He must have been 16. It was for my birthday. The handwriting was messy, the ink smudged. It said, "You're my favorite person in the world. I hope someday I can give you back everything you gave me." I sat with that card for an hour, just staring at it, trying to remember the last time I'd felt like his favorite anything. That card, it felt like a relic from another life, a version of him that no longer existed. The worst part wasn't the distance. It was that I didn't know who started it. Was it Emma? Was it something I did? Did I push too hard? Love him too much? Did I make him feel smothered by my presence just by existing in the spaces I once filled with joy? I began to write things down. Dates, notes, calls missed, conversations remembered. Not because I was bitter, not because I was plotting, but because deep down, something inside me whispered, "You're not crazy, and you're not wrong." And if the day ever came where I needed to prove it, I would. The night after that text, I made myself tea. I didn't want sat in the same spot where I'd unwrapped Daniel's first Christmas ornament, and I smiled. Not because I was happy, far from it. I smiled because something inside me had snapped back into place. Something I'd let go of years ago. I remembered who I was. Not just a mother, not just a woman who gave, but a woman who noticed everything and forgot nothing. I began to act like nothing happened. I posted a picture of my tree on Facebook, a short caption, "Still my favorite season." I added a smiling emoji. They both liked it. Neither commented. That was fine. I didn't want their words anymore. I wanted their silence. Silence was evidence. Every conversation I had with Daniel after that few and far between, I recorded in a notebook I labeled December. I wrote down everything. Not just what he said, but how he said it. The little hesitations. The shift in his breathing when I mentioned family gatherings. The way he always said "we'll see" instead of "we'll be there." Then I started organizing old emails. I dug deep years back. Reservation receipts, money transfers, little things he'd asked me to help with over the years. Some were innocent, others strange. One in particular stood out. An email from his wife Emma sent to my personal address 3 years prior. The subject line was "Urgent Signature Request." I had barely remembered it, but there it was, clear as day. A scan of a document. The body of the email said, "Just need your quick sign-off for bank authorization. All standard." Daniel said you'd be okay with it. I remember feeling rushed when I signed it. I was sick at the time. I trusted them. I didn't even read the whole thing. That signature mine was on a joint access account. Not theirs. Mine. The following week, I ordered copies of every financial document I'd touched in the past 10 years. Every shared asset. Every forgotten joint account. Some were old, barely used. Others still had activity. All the statements came to me slowly in yellow envelopes and printed PDFs, and in them I saw it. Small transfers. Always under $500, always spaced apart, and always from my end. I never gave them that access. Not consciously, not willingly, but my signature, blurry and uneven, was there on the authorization form. And my son's initials were on every transfer. I didn't get mad. Not visibly. I didn't throw anything or scream. I just stared at the numbers, did the math, and wrote down the totals. $12,642. That was the sum. Not enough to ruin me, but enough to tell me something important. They didn't just forget me, they used me. Emma had the gall to text me 2 weeks after Christmas. "Hope you had a relaxing holiday. Things were a bit hectic for us. Daniel's been so overwhelmed. We'll try to come by in January." I replied, "That's all right. Take your time." And then I started making copies. Every form, every signature. I scanned them, printed them, filed them. I even drove to the county courthouse and paid for certified ownership records of my house just to see whose name had ever been linked to it. They'd never asked for it directly, but I had a faint memory Daniel bringing up the idea of simplifying paperwork for when I got older. I'd brushed it off at the time. Laughed. I'm not dying yet. Now I knew what that meant. I called an attorney, one I trusted, an old friend of my late brother. I asked him questions, hypotheticals. I didn't mention names. I just laid out the scenario. He didn't ask for gossip. He gave me advice. Legal, clear, precise. I took notes. The next day I baked a pie. Apple. Crumb topping. I placed it in a foil tin and drove to Daniel's house. Emma answered again. She looked surprised. Just brought a little something, I said, lifting the pie. She took it like it was radioactive. That's thoughtful. Daniel wasn't home. I knew that. I'd planned it that way. I stayed for 5 minutes. Chatted about the weather. Asked about her new job. Pretended to forget the title of her company. When I left, I knew she was watching me from the window. I knew her mind was racing. And I knew she was scared. Because I didn't ask to come in. Didn't ask to see Daniel. Didn't ask for anything. The less I said, the more they'd wonder. Back home, I added a new section to my notebook. I labeled it Behavioral Timeline. Date Jan 5, delivered pie. No invite in. Emma visibly uneasy. I was calm. Too calm. That's what made it effective. I smiled when I hung up the phone. I smiled when I paid my bills. I smiled when I called the trust company to revise my information, quietly removing Daniel's name as my secondary contact. I began practicing control. Real, deliberate control. Not revenge. Not yet, but readiness. I started rereading my will, highlighting, redacting, planning. I wasn't going to lose sleep anymore. They thought I was fragile. They thought I was forgettable. But I was neither. I was waiting and watching. And the moment would come. The moment they'd need me. And when it did, I'd be ready. It started with a postcard. That was the first piece of the puzzle that didn't fit. It arrived on a Tuesday, tucked in between a water bill and an ad for window blinds. No envelope, just a glossy print of a beach resort in Naples, Florida. On the back, in Daniel's handwriting, his unmistakable looped Y and tight lowercase e, it read, "Thanks for the recommendation. This place is paradise. We'll be here another 2 weeks. Love you." I never recommended Naples, never mentioned it, never even been there. But the real detail that made my stomach churn was the timing. He sent that card 2 days after telling me they were barely getting by due to Emma's recent job change. I placed it on the kitchen counter and stared at it while my tea steeped. 2 weeks in Naples, flights, hotel, spending, smiling like the world owed them nothing, and I'd just vanish. I didn't confront him. That wasn't the plan. I opened my laptop instead, pulled up my browser history, my bank statements, my cloud storage, everything I had digital access to. For the next 4 hours, I combed through years of data. I made folders, joint documents, suspicious transactions, Emma communications. Each one grew steadily, like a vine choking a tree. Then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I opened the safe in the back of my closet. It held the original deed to my house, my marriage certificate, and an old lockbox I hadn't opened in decades. Inside were letters, marks mostly faded and useless. But beneath those, I found what I was really looking for: my father's legal handbook. He was a clerk, not a lawyer, but close enough. He'd taught me early paper is power. Never sign what you don't read. Never speak what you don't write. I flipped through those pages until I found the section he'd underlined in red 30 years ago. Revocable trusts and contingency clauses. I copied the reference number, then made another appointment with my lawyer friend. We met at a diner, quiet booth, strong coffee, no questions. I handed him a flash drive and said, "This is everything. I need to know how deep they went." He took it, didn't blink. "Are you ready for what I might find?" I said. "Already found most of it myself." He looked impressed. "Then you already know how rare that is." 3 days later, he called. His voice was low, flat. "You were right. It's layered. They've rerouted access to one of your retirement accounts. The authorization matches the form you showed me, your signature's there, but the file ID was edited 2 weeks after it was supposedly filed." He paused, then said, "You've been siphoned." I already knew, but hearing it aloud, it cut deeper. I sat on my front porch that night, wrapped in a blanket, glass of wine in hand, and watched the sun fall behind the tree line. I pictured Daniel and Emma laughing in Naples, lounging in robes, sipping champagne bought with funds I never gave them. And I thought, you stole from me. Not just money, not just trust. You stole time. You stole kindness. And now, I'm taking it all back. I returned to my files and began the next phase. I drafted letters, one to the financial institution holding the altered trust, another to the notary who had processed the power of attorney. My lawyer helped me phrase them perfectly. We requested document verification, audit trails, timestamps. Most people don't know that the metadata behind a digital signature can tell you everything. 2 weeks passed. Then the first cracks appeared. Daniel called. That alone was rare enough to make me pause. I answered with a neutral hello. He sounded tired. "Hey, Mom? You got a minute? I said. Of course. A pause. Listen. Weird question, but did you happen to talk to anyone at North Bay Financial lately? My chest didn't flinch. I simply said I might have. Why? He hesitated. I could hear Emma in the background whispering something. He cleared his throat. They called me yesterday, said there were some irregularities. That a third party submitted verification requests. They thought it was fraud at first. I said, and let the silence sit. You didn't report anything, did you? I smiled to myself. Daniel. I've been alive long enough to know what my rights are, and what my limits aren't. Another silence, then sharper now. Are you mad at me? I let out a small laugh. I'm not mad. Then what is this? He asked. It's just clarity, I said. You'll understand one day. The next day, Emma called. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice was high-tight, fake cheerful. Hi, just wondering if we could stop by sometime soon, maybe have lunch, we've been meaning to catch up. Let us know, I didn't reply. Instead, I called my accountant and restructured everything. Moved accounts, created layers, assigned contingent beneficiaries. Changed my healthcare proxies, and revoked power of attorney across the board. Replaced it with someone Emma had never met. Then I rewrote the trust. A new foundation, the Green Family Literacy Fund, in memory of my father, fully funded. Set to launch publicly next year. Daniel's name would not appear on the founding documents. He would be listed only as a conditional trustee with oversight limits and clear behavior clauses. That same week, I got a notification from my bank. An attempted login from an unrecognized device. I had the alert forwarded to my attorney. Within 48 hours, we traced the IP. A coworker of Emma's. They were panicking. Good. Because what they didn't know, what they never considered, was that I'd kept every receipt. Every text. Every change of tone. And I had allies they didn't even know existed. People they'd underestimated. Just like they underestimated me. I remember the first time I saw Daniel look afraid of me. Not physically afraid. Not scared of what I'd do, but afraid of what I knew. It was the second week of March. The air still had that brittle bite, the kind that made you pull your coat tighter out of habit. He showed up unannounced, no text, no warning, just knocked. I opened the door, slowly saw him standing there with his hands shoved deep into his pockets. No Emma, just him. That alone told me something was off. Hey, he said. His eyes darted past me like he was checking the house for someone else. I stepped aside. Come in. He walked in like he'd forgotten the layout, like the furniture was new. But nothing had changed. Not really. Except him. He sat on the edge of the couch like it was hot. I stayed standing. What's going on? I asked. He swallowed. I wanted to talk, in person. I nodded slowly. About Naples. His head jerked slightly. No, what Naples? I tilted my head. Postcard you sent me, the one I never suggested. He blinked. Hard. Right. No, I meant about other stuff. I stayed silent. He rubbed his hands together. Mom, did you talk to the bank or the lawyer? About the trust I did, I said. Several, actually. Want me to list the names? He leaned back. Okay, so, you are mad. No, I said calmly. I'm not mad. I'm informed. That's when the color started draining from his face. I don't know what you think happened, he said, his voice shaky, but I never meant to what I cut in. Never meant to take from me, or never meant to get caught. His mouth opened, then closed again. I finally sat, across from him. Not beside, not close, across. Daniel. I said soft, but firm. I raised you better than this. I loved you better than this. He looked at the floor. His knee bounced. I didn't know what Emma was doing, okay? She handled most of the paperwork. I I trusted her. I stared at him. You didn't just trust her. You signed your name beside hers. You signed forms. You let her speak for me. You let her access accounts that weren't hers. And when she smiled in my kitchen, you stood beside her and let it happen. He didn't deny it. Not this time. I was going to fix it, he whispered. I just didn't know how. You could have started by telling me I said. I thought you'd cut me off. I almost laughed. Sweetheart, I already had. You just didn't notice. That silence between us, it wasn't rage. It was mourning. For the boy I used to know. For the man he could have become. I'm not Emma, he said suddenly. No, I agreed. You're not. She's predictable. You disappointed me. He winced. That one landed. I thought I was helping, he mumbled. She said if we didn't do something, we'd fall behind on the second mortgage. I leaned forward, voice steady. You were never entitled to my money, Daniel. Not when you were 10, and not now. I know that, he said, then added, Now I do. He looked up, eyes red. No tears. Not yet. What are you going to do? I already did it, I replied. The accounts are sealed. The trust is rewritten. You've been removed from all decision-making capacities, unless reinstated by a third-party board I appointed. He looked like I'd slapped him. You cut me out. No, I said slowly. I gave you a path back, but not through guilt, through action. He stood, walked in a small circle, scratched the back of his neck. Emma's gone, he said suddenly. I raised an eyebrow. She left, he continued, 3 weeks ago, took her things, and moved out. She said I was weak, that I should have taken more. I said nothing. I didn't gloat. I didn't flinch. I just watched him unravel. She was planning to sell your house, he admitted. Said it'd be easy. Said she'd forge the paperwork if she had to. That made me stand. I walked slowly to the fireplace, reached up, and pulled a single envelope from the mantel. I handed it to him. Inside were 4 pages, copies of emails between Emma and her coworker Jill, talking about how easy old women are to manipulate, talking about cleaning house before she gets too senile to sign. He read them. His face turned gray. She was going to. Yes, I said. She was. He looked at me like he didn't know me. Where did you get these? I'm not the one who's alone in this, I said. You think women like Emma don't burn bridges behind them? You think Jill didn't want a little insurance? People talk Daniel, especially when they think they're safe. He sat again, harder this time. The fight had left him. I poured myself a glass of water, sipped, then said, You have a choice. Live in the shadow of what she made you do, or start crawling out of it. His hands shook. I don't know if I can. That's your business, I said. Mine is making sure you never get the chance to do this to me again. He nodded slowly. When he stood to leave, he paused at the door. Do you still love me? I didn't answer right away. Then I said, Love doesn't vanish, Daniel, but trust does. And that's what you have to earn back. He nodded once, then left. And for the first time in over a year, I slept through the night. Not because I forgave him, but because he finally knew I wasn't the one losing. He came back 2 weeks later. This time, he knocked with less hesitation. He didn't stand like a man looking to negotiate. He stood like someone waiting for a verdict. I opened the door and looked at him. Same face, older somehow. Guilt had aged him in ways time never could. I stepped back wordlessly and let him in. He didn't ask if he could. Just walked slowly to the living room and sat in the same chair he had as a boy. He had a folder in his hands, one of those plain manila ones with creases down the side. His fingers gripped it like it held his life. I sat across from him, I didn't speak. I didn't need to. He opened the folder and took out a stack of papers. These are the restitution documents, he said, voice rough. I liquidated the Naples account. The car Emma leased. The watch she bought with your money. Everything. I raised an eyebrow. He pushed the papers toward me. It's not everything. I know that. But it's what I could do now. I didn't reach for them. Not yet. There's more, he added. I included a written statement, sworn, acknowledging every transaction, every access point. And I attached a letter to your lawyer. You'll see. He waited. I let the silence breathe. Then he said softer, I owe you more than money. I looked at him. Hard. He was thinner now, like the truth had eaten something out of him. He wasn't wearing a wedding ring anymore. His shirt was wrinkled. There were lines under his eyes that hadn't been there 6 months ago. I finally said, You do. He nodded. Didn't argue. I was ashamed, he murmured. That's the truth. When it started, I told myself it was temporary, a shortcut. That I'd repay it before you noticed. I said nothing. Then it became easy, he said. Too easy. Emma was good at twisting it, making it seem normal, logical. She'd say things like, she doesn't even notice, or, it's just borrowing. And I believed it because it was convenient to believe it. He looked up at me, but I always knew better, even when I smiled at your table, even when you hugged me and I pulled away. My throat tightened, but I didn't let it show. I thought you were old, he said, then winced at his own words. Not weak, just harmless. Someone to humor, not someone to respect. Now I did speak. You thought I was background noise. The woman who did too much, too emotional, too present? He nodded slowly. Yes. And now I asked. He looked me in the eye. Now I know you're the only reason I ever had a damn thing worth protecting. I leaned back, crossing my arms. Do you know what I did after you sent that text? His mouth twitched. I imagined something methodical. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I sat in silence and wrote down your name. He swallowed hard. I wrote it beside a number. I continued. 12,642. That was the total you took from me without permission. Do you want to know how long it took me to earn that when you were a child? He nodded. Yes. Almost 3 years. Scrubbing other people's kitchens, wiping spit off their sinks while you sat in the car with a coloring book. His eyes flooded. He looked away. I never asked you for repayment, I said. Not once. All I ever asked was that you remember. Remember who I was when no one else showed up. He covered his face. His shoulders shook. Emma didn't just steal from me, I said. She stole from you. Your name, your spine. She hollowed you out and fed you your own cowardice. And you swallowed it because it was easier than standing up. He dropped his hands. Tears clung to his cheeks now. I'm sorry, he said. God, Mom, I'm sorry. I let those words hang, not because they fixed anything, but because it was the first time they sounded real. I know, I whispered. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, placed it on the table. It was your mother's. Emma had it appraised. Said we could use the money toward the kitchen renovation. I never went through with it, but I let her take it. I'm sorry. I opened it. Inside was my mother's engagement ring. Platinum band. Tiny blue stone chipped at the edge. I hadn't seen it in 15 years. I closed the box and set it aside. I'm not going to pretend this fixes us, I said. But you've started to crawl back. That's something. He nodded. That's all I ask. A place to start. I studied him for a long moment, then said, You'll repay every cent. Not to me, but to others. To people like me. Women who gave everything and were forgotten. You'll serve them, not just write checks. You'll get your hands dirty. He sat taller. Okay. You'll come with me when I launch the foundation, I added. You'll be there. You'll smile. And you won't speak unless spoken to. He gave a small laugh. You always knew how to make an entrance. No, I said, standing. I just know how to make a point. He stood too. Can I come for dinner sometime? I nodded once. Bring your own fork. That made him smile. Not big, not bold, but real. As I walked him to the door, he paused again. You're not just my mother, he said. You're the only person who ever made me look at myself and not look away. I watched him walk to his car. He didn't look back. He didn't have to. He knew I was still watching, still guarding, still whole. I didn't tell anyone else what happened. Not the neighbors, not my sister, not the ladies at the church group who always tried to pry into people's business over stale cookies and lukewarm coffee. Some things are cleaner without a public audience. I've always believed that. Daniel came back the following Sunday. This time he brought groceries. Nothing fancy, just things I liked. Salted butter, real cream, fresh bread. He knew. Somehow he still remembered. He unpacked them in silence while I stood by the counter and watched. He didn't try to fill the air with apologies this time. Didn't try to explain. Just moved with purpose, like a man showing up for a shift he knew he had to earn. He made us omelets. Mine had mushrooms and cheddar, his plain with hot sauce. I didn't help. I let him do the work. I sat, sipped coffee, and let him take up space in the kitchen again. We ate on the porch. The air was crisp, the sun low. Birds picked at the feeder I'd hung last fall. Daniel chewed slowly. Focused. You don't have to forgive me, he said quietly. I know, I replied. I just want to be here, he added. Even if I sit in the back row of your life. I didn't answer that. Not right away. I just watched the birds. Listened to the creak of the wooden swing beneath me. Then I said, You're not in the back row, Daniel. You're in the balcony. That's where people sit when they need to see the whole picture. He smiled a little. That sounds like something Grandma would have said. It is. I nodded. She said it to me when your father left. The next few months were quiet, almost strange in their steadiness. He'd come by once a week, always bringing something. Sometimes groceries, sometimes flowers, sometimes nothing but his own 2 hands. I gave him small tasks: fix a cabinet door, help me clear the attic, repot a dying fern. He never hesitated, never complained. He didn't treat it like penance. He treated it like presents. One evening in April, he came by with paint samples. I was thinking, he said, maybe we could repaint the living room? That beige hasn't been your style in years. I raised an eyebrow. You think you know my style now? He laughed. No, I just want to try. I picked the green, not because I liked it best, but because it was bold. The opposite of what I used to choose. As we moved furniture and taped off trim, he asked, Do you think she'll ever contact you again, Emma? I said. He nodded. No, I replied. She won't risk it. He was quiet a while, then said, She's moved on, you know. Met someone. Already posting photos again. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. That chapter was sealed. Later, I asked him a question that had been sitting in my gut for too long. When did you know? I asked. He didn't need clarification. That it had gone too far. I nodded. He leaned on the paint roller side. When you brought the pie. That surprised me. Why then? Because you looked at me like you already knew? And still, you smiled. You brought warmth into a house that had turned cold toward you. I remembered that day. The pie. the silence, the way Emma looked at me like I was a moth to be brushed away. I didn't know everything I said, but I knew enough. Daniel cleaned the brushes. I stood by the door, arms crossed, watching him like a stranger I might trust again someday. When the room was finished, I sat in my recliner and stared at the walls. The green looked rich in the afternoon light. Deep, alive. "This suits you," he said. I smiled. "It does now." Later that week, I visited the foundation office downtown. Just a small space. 3 rooms, 1 intern, a plaque on the wall with my father's name in gold letters. Daniel followed behind me like a shadow with purpose. He shook hands. He listened. He asked questions. Not for show, but because he cared. I watched him speak to a young mother there. She was in her 20s, holding a toddler on one hip and a folder of applications in the other. Daniel knelt to her son's level and said, "You're lucky to have a strong mama." That's when I knew. He was beginning again. Not clean, not perfect, but honest. One night in May, we sat on the porch again. It was raining this time. Soft, steady. Daniel handed me a piece of paper. I wrote something he said, for the Foundation's newsletter. Just a reflection. I read it slowly. His words were simple. No flair, just truth. I almost forgot where I came from. I almost lost the one person who never stopped showing up. But I found her again in the sound of her voice, in the way she holds silence like a sermon. I don't deserve her grace. But I'm learning to carry it anyway. I folded the paper carefully. "You wrote that?" He nodded. "You're starting to sound like the man I raised," I said. "Still working on it?" he replied. I reached out and placed my hand over his. "Just for a moment." "I don't need perfection," I said. "Just truth." He nodded. "Then I'll keep bringing it." The rain tapped gently on the roof above us. Somewhere down the street, wind chimes sang a low, tangled tune. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a mother holding on to the memory of a child. I felt like a woman who had been wronged, but not destroyed. A woman who had outlived betrayal and come back stronger. The letter arrived on a Wednesday. Heavy envelope. Thick cream stock. My name written in his handwriting, neat, deliberate, like he'd taken his time. The stamp wasn't crooked. That mattered more than it should have. I sat at the kitchen table, fingers resting on the flap, and just stared at it for a while. Something about the weight of it made my chest feel tight. I didn't open it right away. I made tea first. The kind he used to buy me in those little holiday sampler packs, cranberry spice. Then I sat back down and slid my thumb under the flap. There were 5 pages inside. Handwritten, front and back. He didn't start with "Dear Mom." He started with, "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need to say this anyway." That line hit hard, because it was the first time he spoke to me without defense, without pretense, without that slick, practiced voice of someone trying to sound better than they feel. "When I was a kid, I thought you were magic. I really did. You always knew what to say, even when I didn't want to hear it. You always had something in your purse to fix things. Band-Aids, mints, pens, safety pins. You were always ready, even when life wasn't." I stopped reading, pressed my lips together, and breathed through my nose. Then I kept going. I don't know when that started to annoy me. Maybe college. Maybe after I met Emma. I think part of me wanted to be the one with the answers for once. But I never asked for that, did I? I just resented you quietly like a coward. And when Emma started planting ideas about money, about independence, I didn't push back. I nodded, smiled, and let myself believe the lies because they were easier than facing my own fear. Fear of being small, fear of not being enough without your guidance. I paused. Looked up at the window. Light was fading. A squirrel darted across the lawn. I picked up the letter again. The day I sent you that text, Christmas is just too much with you there. I was trying to avoid a fight with Emma. That's all it was. A shortcut. A cheap way to keep the peace in a house that had already turned cold. I didn't even think about what it would do to you. And I'm so ashamed of that now. You didn't deserve that message. You didn't deserve silence. You didn't deserve to be left out of the life you helped build with your bare hands. You deserved a son who stood up for you. I stopped again. Let that sentence sit in my chest. I've been going to therapy. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to parade it like some medal. But I've been unpacking things, deep things, and the one constant that keeps coming up every session, every exercise is you. Not in a blame way, in a grounding way. You're the truth I keep circling back to. The one person who never abandoned me, even when I made you want to. That's when the tears started. Not loud, not messy, just quiet streaks down my cheeks while I read. You made magic out of coupons. You turned hunger into meals, loneliness into safety. You taught me how to fold a shirt, how to apologize, how to write thank you notes. And I threw all that away for the illusion of control. I'm not asking for a clean slate. I'm not asking for holidays or hugs. I'm just asking for a chance to keep showing up. In silence, if that's what you need. In service, if that's what helps. Because I remember now. I remember the sound of your voice when I had nightmares. I remember the way you clapped at my school plays, like I was the star, even when I wasn't. I remember you, and I want to earn my way back into that memory. He signed it simply Daniel, no flourish. No title. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Didn't put it away. Just kept it on the table beside me like a presence. That night, I didn't sleep much. I sat on the porch with a blanket over my knees, listening to the wind move through the trees. The next morning, I took out my own notepad. The same one where I once wrote, "Things I won't forget." I added a new section. Things I'll try to understand. Number 1, that sometimes people don't realize they've lost their soul until someone shows them the whole. Number 2, that remorse isn't redemption, but it's a seed. Number 3, that a man who writes with his own pain on the page is different than the one who hides behind charm and excuses. Over the next week, I carried that letter with me. To the post office, to the library, to the grocery store, not to show anyone, just to have it near. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something like weight shifting, like a knot loosening. On Sunday, I saw him again. He didn't bring anything this time, just himself. He didn't ask about the letter, didn't mention it, but I saw it in his eyes. He was wondering. I didn't tell him I'd read it 5 times, didn't tell him I'd memorized parts of it. I just poured coffee, handed him a mug, and said, "The hydrangeas need pruning next week. Bring gloves." He nodded. "I will." And in that simple exchange, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Not a perfect son, but a real man. Trying, present, and willing to carry the weight of who he had been without asking me to hold it for him anymore. I wasn't expecting him that evening. No call, no text. Just a knock, gentle, almost hesitant. It was late, near dusk. The kind of time when you don't expect company, and the light on the porch starts to flicker, like it's unsure if it should keep trying. I opened the door and found Daniel standing there holding 2 steaming mugs, one in each hand. He smiled softly. "I made you tea." I took it, felt the heat in my fingers, and stepped aside without a word. He walked in like he had before everything broke, but slower, more careful. Not like he belonged, but like he hoped he might be allowed to. We sat in the living room. No TV, no music, just the sound of the clock ticking on the wall. I sipped the tea. Earl Grey, my favorite. He remembered. I was driving home, he said finally, and I just didn't want to go straight there. Thought maybe I could stop by. You're always welcome, I said quietly, but that doesn't mean you're always safe here. He nodded. I understand. That was the difference now. He didn't push, didn't ask for comfort where he hadn't earned it. He just sat with me holding his own mug, like it anchored him to the room. I cleaned out the guest room, he said after a while. Put up those old photos you gave me, the ones from the lake house. You used to love it there, I replied. I still do, he said. Emma never wanted to go. Said it smelled like mildew and wasted weekends. I sipped again. Let the silence stretch. I think that's when I started to notice the shift, he continued. Not just in her. In me. I gave up places I loved for a version of myself I thought I was supposed to be. I glanced at him. And what version is that? Successful, he said immediately. Sharp, controlled. Someone who didn't need help. Someone who didn't have a mother who made cinnamon rolls and cried during documentaries. That one made me smile just slightly. But I'm not that man, he said, and I never was. No, I said. You were better. His eyes glistened, but he didn't look away. I know I have a long way to go, he said. And I don't expect us to go backward. I don't even want that. I want to move forward. Different direction, new rules. That made me sit up a little. What rules? Honesty first, he said. Even when it's uncomfortable. Even when it's ugly. I nodded slowly. That's fair. And when we spend time together, he continued. We do it because we want to, not because we feel obligated. Agreed. He hesitated. And if I ever get married again, you get a seat at the table. Not because I'm your son, but because you're my foundation. That one caught me off guard. I didn't respond right away. I stared into the dark tea, the way the steam curled like ribbon. Then I said, That sounds like something a man says when he's ready to start over. He nodded. I think I am. I took a deep breath. Good. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. Can I ask you something? Depends on the question. What's the hardest part about forgiving me? I didn't even have to think. Knowing you watched it happen, I said. Knowing you saw what Emma was doing and let it happen. That you didn't just fail to stop her, you co-signed it. You wore it like a second skin and smiled while I handed you everything. He flinched. I wasn't trying to hurt him. Just speaking plainly. I think about that a lot, I added. How long I've been feeding people who thought of me as disposable, who never asked what it cost me to show up. I've carried every birthday party, every hospital visit, every Christmas on my back. And you, I paused, swallowing the heat in my throat. You turned your back because someone prettier told you I was a weight. He bowed his head. I believed her, I know I said. But now you're here. That matters. He nodded. It does. We sat in silence again, the kind that feels earned. Not strained. After a while, he said, You changed the will, didn't you? I looked at him, not surprised. Yes. Am I in it? You're protected, I said, but not empowered. You'll inherit nothing outright. You'll be named a guardian of legacy, not a beneficiary. If you want access, you work for it. If you try anything unethical, you're removed. He nodded slowly. That's more than I deserve. It's what I can live with, I said, and what I believe will keep me sleeping through the night. He exhaled like he'd been holding that breath for weeks. Thank you for even including me. You're still my son, I said, but I'm not just your mother anymore. I'm a woman who lived, survived, and I won't let anyone rewrite that. He looked at me like he was seeing me clearly for the first time. Not as a figure from childhood, not as a fallback, but as a force. We didn't hug that night. We didn't cry, or hold hands, or say anything dramatic. He stood when it was time, set his mug in the sink. "I'll come by next weekend," he said. "Bring clippers," I said. "Hydrangeas still haven't been trimmed." He gave a little half smile. "Yes, ma'am." I watched him walk to his car, and when I closed the door, I felt something strange. Not victory, not vindication, but peace. Earned, solid, quiet as a blanket, and for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt chosen. I sat with the will for 3 days before I touched it. It had been locked away in my fireproof cabinet, untouched, unchanged, for nearly 10 years. It still had Mark's name on a few things long outdated, long irrelevant. It still listed Daniel as my sole heir. And for years I thought that was love. Automatic, obvious, that a mother giving her child everything was just what you did. But now, I opened that folder with steady hands. Not out of anger, not revenge, but alignment. I needed the paper to reflect the truth of who I'd become. The first thing I did was call my lawyer. I told him I wanted complete restructuring, asset protection, trust conditionality, legacy security. He listened patiently, asked precise questions. Never once questioned my clarity. "You're not trying to punish," he said. "You're trying to preserve." "Exactly," I said. "I want him to benefit, but only if he stays clean." We drafted a new will, clear, firm, and forcible. Daniel's name stayed, but with clauses that meant something. He'd only receive what I left if he remained in compliance with a new set of values. Any illegal or exploitative behavior, any manipulation of family assets, any attempts to override the foundation's mission, he'd be removed. Instantly. No appeal. I created a board of trustees for the foundation. 3 people, none of them family. One was my former colleague from a nonprofit I'd volunteered at after retirement. One was a retired judge, and the third a young woman I mentored during her single motherhood, strong, honest, sharp as glass. These 3 would control the trust. Not Daniel, not any spouse he might have in the future. The board would determine yearly distributions, project approvals, and Daniel's continued eligibility to serve. The foundation would focus on literacy access to legal aid for older women and financial empowerment training for single mothers. It would be called the Green Table Trust, named for the old kitchen table where I taught Daniel how to count change budget for groceries and read the Sunday paper with comprehension. My lawyer had it all bound, notarized, and filed within a week. I kept 1 copy. Gave a sealed envelope to Daniel. He didn't open it in front of me. He just nodded and said, "Whatever it says, I'll earn it." That evening, I poured a glass of wine and sat in my chair by the window. It was early evening, warm breeze coming through the screen. I whispered, "It's done, Mama," because it was. I had taken back the narrative, and I had done it without raising my voice. Daniel's visits continued, sometimes weekly, sometimes less, but always steady. He brought tools, garden supplies, fresh coffee, silence when needed. Once, while we trimmed the hydrangeas together, he asked, "Do you ever wish I hadn't come back?" I shook my head. "I wish you hadn't left me alone in the first place. But no, I don't wish you stayed gone." He nodded, taking that in. Not arguing, not trying to fix the past. One Saturday, I got a call from the foundation's administrator. "Daniel's been volunteering," she said. "We didn't assign him anything, but he's showing up every Friday. Quiet. Helpful. Not looking for attention." I smiled. Good. That's exactly where he should be. Later that month, I updated my obituary draft. Yes, I wrote one. Not because I expect to go soon, but because I wanted it done in my words. It didn't list Daniel as a grieving son. It listed him as a contributing board advisor to the Green Table Trust. Because that's who he is now. Not just my child. A man who earns what he takes. The final touch was the house. I placed it in a living trust completely separate from Daniel's name. After my passing, it would become a refuge home for women leaving financial abuse. I worked with the local shelter. They were thrilled. One counselor even cried when I walked her through the rooms and explained my plans. "This feels like a place someone could heal," she said. "That's the point," I replied. When Daniel found out, he didn't argue. He just said, "It's a good house. It should go to someone who needs it." I said nothing, just nodded. That week, I bought a new tree for the front yard, a red maple. I planted it with Daniel's help. We stood together, dirt on our hands, sweat on our brows, looking at the fragile sapling in the sunlight. "You think it'll make it?" he asked. I looked at him. "I think it'll survive if it roots deep enough." He was quiet for a long time, then said, "Just like you." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. He drove away that afternoon, and I sat on the porch with a glass of iced tea and a pen. Pulled out my notebook again. Under things I'll try to understand, I added that some relationships can't return to what they were, but they can still move forward. That control isn't love, but accountability is. That giving someone a second chance doesn't mean handing them a third, and that my peace no longer requires anyone else's approval. I folded the notebook shut, looked out across my yard at the sapling swaying in the breeze. The air smelled like cut grass citrus from the tea and something new. Not hope. Certainty that I had done everything right. On my terms. In my own name. Christmas came different that year. Not better. Not worse. Just different. And for once, I didn't try to make it something it wasn't. No big tree. No glass angels. No 25-day countdown or 3-course dinner for people who didn't appreciate it. I rented a small cottage 2 hours away by the coast. 1-bedroom wood paneling a fireplace that crackled more than it burned. It had a tiny tree already set up by the window with fake snow on the tips and little red bows. I didn't add a single ornament. I brought 3 things with me: a book, a scarf my mother knitted before her hands gave out, and the letter Daniel wrote me months ago, folded and tucked in my journal like scripture. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't post a photo. I didn't send out cards. I just left. On Christmas morning, I woke up to seagulls screeching outside, and a wind so cold it made the window creak in its frame. I pulled on my slippers, made tea, and stood by the window looking out at the water. Gray-blue wild, moving like something that couldn't be held. I wrapped myself in the scarf and lit a fire. Not because it was cold, but because I wanted the sound. That familiar crackle. Like someone whispering good things to you when you're still half asleep. Around 10 a.m., I opened the one gift I allowed myself to bring. A photo book. I'd made it online. All black and white pictures, Daniel as a baby me holding him in the hospital. Us baking cookies, sledding him sitting on my lap with peanut butter on his face. I turned each page, slowly running my hand across the smooth paper. At the end of the book, there was a blank page. I'd left it there on purpose. Underneath it, in small print, I had typed, "The rest of our story will be written with care." Or not at all. I sat with that sentence for a long time. At noon, there was a knock at the door. Soft, hesitant. I froze. The cottage manager hadn't said they'd be by. And I hadn't ordered anything. Another knock. I walked slowly to the door, heart thudding not out of fear, but out of something I didn't recognize at first. I opened it. There he was. Daniel, hair windswept, jacket zipped up to his chin. In his hands were 2 paper cups. He smiled a little. I figured I'd find you near the water. How, I asked. He looked sheepish. You used your loyalty card at that gas station off Route 8. You forget I helped set it up years ago. I saw the charge this morning. I shook my head, smiled despite myself. That's a bit invasive. I was worried, he said. Didn't want you to be alone. I'm not alone, I said. I'm here. I know he nodded. But can I sit with you anyway? I stepped back, let him in. He handed me a cup. Coffee, real cream, just like I used to make it. We sat by the fire. Not speaking at first, just letting the sound of the flames carry the quiet. I didn't bring a gift, he said. Good, I replied. I didn't bring any room for guilt. He smiled, nodded. After a while, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It's not a letter, not like before. Just something I wrote while sitting in the car. He handed it to me. I opened it. One sentence. You're not too much. You were always just enough. That hit me harder than anything else had, because that's what I'd feared most, that I was too emotional, too present, too strong, that I'd overwhelmed the people I loved with the weight of how deeply I loved them. I looked at him, and for the first time since he was 12, I said, Come here. He stood, crossed the room, sat on the floor beside my chair, and leaned against my leg. I put my hand on his head like I used to. No words, just breath, just warmth. We stayed like that until the fire went low. Eventually, he stood stretched, looked around. This place suits you, he said. It suits the version of me that needed to find herself again, I replied. He looked me in the eye. I'd like to meet that version, if she'll have me. I didn't answer directly, just poured us both more coffee. Later, we walked along the water, bundled up waves crashing at our feet. He picked up a smooth stone and handed it to me. Start over, I took it, put it in my coat pocket. Start forward, I said, never back. We watched the sun dip toward the horizon. I didn't feel bitter. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt known, not by the world, not even entirely by him, but by myself. And that was enough. That Christmas didn't end with gifts or music or laughter echoing through a crowded house. It ended with two people walking a cold beach side by side. Not as mother and son, not as victim and betrayer, but as two human beings, trying, and for once, not failing. I didn't think closure would come on a Tuesday morning, but that's how it happened. Quiet, no lightning strike, no dramatic apology or final confrontation. Just me sitting in my library opening the last box from the attic. It was filled with papers I hadn't touched in years, old school awards, yellowed bank statements, dusty photo albums, and a sealed manila envelope I didn't recognize. Inside were the originals of everything. The deed to the house untouched and unmarked. The very first version of my will dated 15 years ago before the rot started creeping in. A copy of a letter my father wrote me the day I bought this house, never hand over the roof you bled to build. If someone wants to share it, they better bring a hammer and stay through the storms. I read it slowly, whispered the words to myself like scripture. Daniel came by later that day, unannounced, but I didn't mind anymore. He brought me a pearl necklace he'd had cleaned and repaired. It had been my mother's. One of the few things she wore regularly, simple and honest. I thought it belonged back with you, he said. Where it started. I nodded, took it gently, fastened it around my neck, and looked at him. It still fits. He smiled. It always did. We sat in the sunroom, the soft hum of the old radio playing jazz in the background. No conversation this time. Just silence. Easy-earned silence. I thought back to everything. The betrayal, the siphoned funds, the blank stares across dinner tables, the nights I cried into my pillow wondering what I'd done to make myself invisible. But now I could see it clearly. I hadn't been invisible. I'd been seen, just not valued, not respected, and sometimes that's more painful than being ignored. But I had changed that, on my own. I had taken my story back. The foundation opened officially in the summer. We had a modest ribbon-cutting ceremony. Local press showed up. A few board members gave short speeches. Daniel stood at the back in a clean gray blazer, no spotlight, no microphone. When a reporter asked if he was a co-founder, he smiled and said, "No, just someone who's grateful to help." That was all. He helped paint the offices. He cleaned the bathrooms after the first weekend event. He didn't complain. He didn't flinch. He didn't once ask what was in it for him. One afternoon, I walked past him speaking to a young man, barely 20, holding a baby, while his girlfriend filled out paperwork. Daniel was crouched down, smiling, saying, "I used to think I had to do it all alone." "You don't. Trust me. There's help if you ask." And I thought he finally knows who he is without taking something from me to prove it. I let go of the last shard of resentment that day. Not because he asked me to, but because it no longer served me. We had dinner together the following week. My house, just the two of us. I made his favorite meatloaf and mashed potatoes. He brought wine, real wine, not the cheap stuff I used to settle for. We ate slowly, talked about the new roof I was planning, about his work, about the new woman he was seeing. He didn't ask me to meet her yet. I was glad. That bridge could come later, or never. I didn't need to be pulled into his next chapter unless it was written with clarity. After dinner, he cleared the table, washed dishes. No fanfare, no praise-seeking. Just a man doing what should have been done years ago. As he dried the last plate, he turned to me and said, "I'm proud of you." I laughed softly. "That's my line." "I mean it," he said. "You didn't just survive us. You outgrew us." I looked at him, a man I once carried on my hip, who I once bathed in a sink, who once stole from me thinking I'd never notice. And now, here he was. Not perfect, not fixed, but real and humble. "I'm proud of you too," I said. "Not for what you're doing now, but for not pretending like the past didn't happen." He nodded. "That's the hardest part." "No," I corrected gently. "The hardest part was living with it before you were ready to admit it." We sat by the fire for a while after that. No more to say. He left quietly. No hug, just a soft, "See you Sunday." "Bring butter," I called after him. He laughed. Always. After he left, I changed into my nightgown, brushed my teeth, and sat in my chair by the window. The moon was high full. I opened the last page of my notebook. Wrote 4 final lines. I survived disappointment. I reclaimed everything with grace. I gave back what I chose, not what was demanded. And I never let them define my ending. I closed the book, placed it on the shelf, and smiled. Not the soft smile of a woman pretending she's fine. The quiet smile of a woman who knew she'd already won. In her name, on her terms, with her legacy sealed forever.